Why getting older is God's greatest blessing. Have you ever looked in the mirror and noticed those first gray hairs, those gentle lines around your eyes, and felt a moment of panic? In a world obsessed with staying young, aging can feel like a burden. But what if I told you that every wrinkle, every silver strand, is actually part of God's masterpiece? The world sees aging as a countdown, but God sees it as a count up, each year adding wisdom, purpose, and divine beauty to your story. Today, we're going to uncover a transformative truth that most people miss. Aging isn't just a natural process. It's one of God's most profound blessings, carefully designed to bring you closer to His perfect plan. Join me as we explore why the very thing society fears might actually be God's greatest gift to us. What you're about to discover could completely transform how you view every birthday, every life stage, and every moment of your journey ahead. Society and old age, the untold truth. Let's talk about something we all see, but rarely question. Walk into any drugstore, and you'll find shelves lined with anti-aging creams, wrinkle removers, and hair dyes. Turn on your TV, and you'll see countless advertisements promising to help you stay young forever. Our society has created a multi-billion-dollar industry built on a single emotion: the fear of aging. But have you noticed how different cultures view aging? In Japan, becoming older is celebrated with deep respect. They have a national holiday called Respect for the Aged Day, where the elderly are honored as living treasures. In many African societies, gray hair is seen as a crown of wisdom, earning you a seat among community decision-makers. Yet here in the West, we often treat aging like a disease that needs to be cured. Think about it. We spend countless hours and enormous resources fighting against something as natural as breathing. We've convinced ourselves that youth equals value, that staying young means staying relevant. But who sold us this story? And more importantly, why did we buy it? This is where God's perspective turns everything upside down. While the world whispers, "Hide your age," God declares it as a mark of honor. Proverbs 16:31 tells us, "Gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life." Imagine that. The very thing we're trying to cover up, God sees as a crown. The world sees aging as a countdown to irrelevance, but God sees it as a count-up to wisdom. Every year adds another layer of experience, another chapter of His faithfulness, another opportunity to witness His promises unfold. When society says, "You're getting old," God says, "You're getting ready." But here's the real mystery we need to unpack. Why does our culture fear something that God clearly celebrates? Perhaps it's because we've lost sight of the bigger picture. We're so focused on preserving our physical appearance that we've forgotten about nurturing our spiritual growth. We're fighting so hard to stay young on the outside that we're missing the beautiful transformation happening on the inside. Consider this. In nature, the most magnificent trees are often the oldest. Their deep roots, weathered bark, and sprawling branches tell stories of storms weathered and seasons conquered. They don't apologize for their age. They stand tall, providing shade and strength to everything around them. Isn't it time we started seeing our own aging process in the same light? The truth that society doesn't want to acknowledge is that aging isn't just a natural process. It's a divine appointment. Each birthday isn't just a marker of time past. It's a milestone of God's continued faithfulness in your life. Every line on your face isn't a flaw to be erased. It's a testament to the stories God has written through your life. So while the world continues its frantic chase after eternal youth, we're invited to embrace a different perspective. What if, instead of seeing aging as a decline, we saw it as God intended? a gradual unveiling of His purpose in our lives. What if every gray hair and wrinkle became not a source of shame, but a badge of honor in our journey with Him? This shifts everything, doesn't it? Suddenly, aging isn't something to fear or fight against. It's a sacred journey, a transformation that God Himself orchestrates. And as we'll discover, this is just the beginning of understanding why getting older might be one of God's greatest blessings in disguise. Old age is a proof of God's faithfulness. Have you ever really looked at an elderly person's face? Not just a glance, but truly looked at the story written there? Each line tells a tale of laughter shared, tears shed, and battles won. These aren't just wrinkles. They're roadmaps of God's faithfulness throughout a lifetime. They're physical proof of His promise that He will never leave nor forsake us. Let me share with you one of the most remarkable stories of aging in the Bible. Abraham and Sarah. Picture this: a couple well past their prime, Abraham at 100 years old and Sarah at 90, probably with more wrinkles than hopes, more gray hairs than dreams. By society's standards, their story was over. But God? He was just getting started. When everyone else had written them off as too old, God wrote them into the greatest story of faith ever told. Think about Sarah's laugh when she heard she would have a child at 90. It wasn't just disbelief. It was the laugh of someone who had been conditioned by society to believe their useful days were behind them. But God transformed that skeptical laugh into the joyful name of their son, Isaac, which means laughter. Every time they called their son's name, they were reminded that God's timeline doesn't follow our culture's expiration dates. This brings us to one of the most beautiful promises in Scripture, found in Isaiah 46:4. Even to your old age and gray hairs I am He. I am He who will sustain you. I have made you, and I will carry you. I will sustain you, and I will rescue you. Notice how God doesn't just promise to tolerate our aging. He promises to actively sustain us through it. He's not standing at a distance watching us age. He's carrying us through every moment of it. Consider Moses. He was 80 years old when God called him to his greatest adventure. By today's standards, Moses would have been long retired, perhaps sitting in a rocking chair somewhere. Instead, God saw those 80 years as preparation, not expiration. Every gray hair on Moses' head represented another year of experience that God would use to lead His people to freedom. Or think about Noah. He was no young man when God called him to build the ark. He spent 120 years on that project, becoming older with every plank he laid. But each year added to his age didn't diminish his purpose. It amplified his testimony. Every gray hair he gained while building that ark became a witness to God's patient faithfulness. The beautiful truth is that God's promises don't come with an age limit. Look at Daniel. He was still receiving visions and interpreting dreams well into his elderly years. Anna, the prophetess, was 84 when she saw the infant Jesus and proclaimed him as the Messiah. Their age didn't disqualify them. It prepared them for their moment of divine purpose. But here's where it gets even more profound. Aging isn't just about counting years. It's about recounting God's faithfulness. Every birthday becomes a milestone of mercy. Every gray hair, a testament to grace. When David wrote in Psalm 71:18, "Even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation," he wasn't lamenting his age. He was leveraging it as a platform to proclaim God's goodness. And isn't this exactly what we see in nature? The most enduring testimonies of God's faithfulness are often the oldest. The ancient redwoods, The Grand Canyons, the weathered mountains, they all declare that time doesn't diminish beauty. It deepens it. Each ring in a tree trunk tells of another year of God's provision. Each layer in the canyon walls speaks of His enduring presence. This is why every wrinkle, every gray hair, every sign of aging isn't just a mark of time passing. It's evidence of promises kept. Each morning you wake up is another note in the symphony of God's faithful love. Your aging isn't a betrayal of your body. It's a biography of God's blessings. So the next time you notice a new gray hair or spot another wrinkle, remember, these aren't signs of decay. They're signatures of divine faithfulness. They're not counting down what's left of your life. They're counting up the countless ways God has proven His love for you. In a world that sees aging as a crisis to be managed, we can see it as a chronicle of mercy to be celebrated. Because here's the truth that changes everything. When God promises to be faithful to the end, He's not just talking about being there at the finish line. He's promising to make every step of the journey meaningful, every year purposeful, every season significant. Your age isn't just a number. It's a narrative of His never-ending faithfulness. Old age and wisdom, the most precious asset. Let's pause for a moment and consider something remarkable. Why does the Bible consistently link age with wisdom? This isn't just a casual connection. It's a profound truth that our fast-paced, youth-obsessed culture has largely forgotten. When God looks at gray hair and wrinkles, He sees something far more valuable than our anti-aging creams could ever preserve. He sees wisdom refined by time. Consider the story of Solomon. We often remember him as the young king who asked God for wisdom. But have you ever noticed how his perspective deepened with age? The same man who wrote the practical wisdom of Proverbs in his younger years later penned Ecclesiastes in his twilight years, a book that grapples with life's deepest questions. His wisdom didn't diminish with age. It matured like fine wine, becoming richer and more complex with time. Job 12:12 tells us plainly, "Is not wisdom found among the aged? Does not long life bring understanding?" This isn't just a poetic sentiment. It's a divine principle woven into the fabric of human experience. Think about it. Every gray hair represents a lesson learned. Every wrinkle a challenge overcome. Every year another layer of understanding added to life's complexities. But here's where our modern society has it backwards. We've created a culture that values information over wisdom, quick answers over deep understanding. Young professionals can Google any fact in seconds, but can Google teach you how to navigate life's storms with grace? Can it show you how to forgive when your heart is broken, or how to find peace in life's uncertainties? The wisdom that comes with age isn't just about knowing more facts. It's about understanding life's deeper rhythms. It's knowing when to speak and when to listen, when to act and when to wait, when to hold on and when to let go. These aren't lessons you can learn from a YouTube video or a TikTok trend. They're truths written slowly, sometimes painfully, into the fabric of your being through years of living. Think about your own grandparents or the elderly people in your community. When they share their stories, they're not just reminiscing. They're passing down wisdom that's been tested by time and proven through experience. Every struggle they've overcome, every joy they've celebrated, every loss they've endured has contributed to a wisdom that can't be rushed or downloaded. This is why the Bible tells us in Leviticus 19:32 to rise in the presence of the aged and honor the elderly. It's not just about showing respect. It's about recognizing the invaluable treasury of wisdom they carry. When we dismiss the elderly as outdated or irrelevant, we're not just disrespecting them. we're cutting ourselves off from centuries of accumulated wisdom. Consider how different cultures honor their elders. In Native American traditions, tribal elders are considered the keepers of cultural wisdom and spiritual knowledge. In many Asian societies, the elderly are consulted before major decisions because their experience is seen as an irreplaceable resource. These cultures understand something we've largely forgotten. Wisdom isn't just about having information, it's about having perspective. But here's what makes age-acquired wisdom truly special. It's not just about looking back, it's about seeing deeper. An elderly person can look at a situation and see patterns that younger eyes miss. They can hear a story and understand nuances that youth overlooks. They've seen enough sunrises and sunsets to know that today's crisis isn't the end of the story, and today's triumph isn't the final chapter. This kind of wisdom brings a special kind of peace. When you've weathered enough storms, you learn to trust the anchor more than you fear the waves. When you've seen enough seasons change, you understand that winter always gives way to spring. This is why the elderly often possess a serenity that eludes the young. They've lived long enough to see God's faithfulness proven time and time again. And let's talk about something our productivity-obsessed culture often misses. Wisdom isn't just about making right decisions. It's about understanding what truly matters. The elderly often have a clarity about life's priorities that comes only through years of sifting the essential from the trivial. They've lived long enough to know that relationships matter more than achievements, that character outlasts credentials, and that love is the only investment that never fails. This is why Proverbs 20:29 tells us, "The glory of young men is their strength, but the splendor of old men is their gray hair." Yes, youth has its advantages: energy, vigor, strength. But age has something far more precious: the wisdom to know how to use those gifts well, the understanding to see beyond the surface, and the perspective to recognize what truly lasts. So perhaps it's time we stopped seeing aging as a process of decline and started seeing it as God does, a process of refinement, where each year adds another layer of wisdom to our lives. Every gray hair, every laugh line, every year added to our age isn't just marking time, it's marking the accumulation of wisdom that makes our lives richer, deeper, and more meaningful in God's grand design. The mission of the elderly, guiding the next generation. Let me share something powerful with you. God never wastes a wrinkle. Every line etched by time, every gray hair that appears, is part of His divine preparation for one of the most crucial roles in human history: being a guide for the next generation. This isn't just a nice sentiment. It's a sacred calling that becomes clearer with each passing year. Think about the relationship between Paul and Timothy in the Bible. Paul, the seasoned apostle, didn't just teach Timothy doctrine. He poured his life experience into this young protege. When Paul writes, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young," 1 Timothy 4:12, he's speaking from decades of ministry experience, sharing wisdom that only years of walking with God could provide. This wasn't just mentoring, it was spiritual inheritance being passed down. Titus 2:3-5 gives us a beautiful blueprint of this intergenerational mission. Likewise, teach the older women to be reverent in the way they live. Then they can urge the younger women to love their husbands and children. Notice the sequence here. The wisdom gained through years of living becomes the foundation for guiding those who follow. It's a divine relay race where each generation passes the baton of faith and wisdom to the next. But here's something remarkable about this mission. It's not just about teaching facts or sharing information. The elderly are called to be living testimonies of God's faithfulness through time. When a grandmother shares stories of God's provision during hard times with her grandchildren, she's not just reminiscing, she's building faith foundations that will sustain the next generation through their own storms. Consider how God designed the Jewish tradition of Passover. The elderly aren't just participants in the celebration. They're the storytellers, the keepers of memory, the ones who explain to wide-eyed children what God has done. Every wrinkle on their faces adds authenticity to their testimony. Every gray hair validates their account of God's faithfulness through the years. This is why Psalm 78:4 commands us to tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, His power, and the wonders He has done. The elderly aren't just archive keepers, they're bridge builders, connecting past faithfulness to future hope. Their stories become the stepping stones that the next generation uses to cross their own rivers of doubt and uncertainty. In our digital age, we might be tempted to think that Google has replaced the need for elderly wisdom. But can an internet search tell you how to keep faith during loss? Can social media teach you how to maintain joy in suffering? This is where the elderly shine brightest, in sharing not just information, but transformation. They can tell you not just what happened, but what it meant, how it felt, and most importantly, how God worked through it all. Look at the story of Joshua and Caleb. They were the only ones from their generation who entered the Promised Land, and their role wasn't just to occupy it. It was to tell the next generation about God's faithfulness. Every gray hair on their heads represented another story of God's provision, another testimony of His power, another lesson in trusting His promises. But this mission goes beyond just sharing stories. The elderly have a unique ability to see patterns that younger eyes miss. They can look at current events and say, "I've seen this before," not with cynicism, but with hope born of experience. They can counsel the young through life's challenges because they've walked similar paths and found God faithful at every turn. Think about the unique perspective that comes with age. When an elderly person speaks about perseverance, it carries weight because they've persevered. When they talk about God's faithfulness, it resonates because they've tested that faithfulness through decades. When they encourage others to trust God's timing, it's powerful because they've seen His perfect timing unfold over a lifetime. This is why Malachi 4:6 speaks about turning the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. It's not just about family reconciliation. It's about generational connection, about creating bridges of understanding and wisdom that span the years. The elderly are God's appointed bridge builders, connecting past truth to present challenges. And here's something beautiful about this mission. It gives profound purpose to every year God adds to our lives. Each experience, each trial overcome, each victory celebrated becomes part of the legacy we're called to pass on. Growing older isn't about becoming less relevant. It's about becoming more equipped for this vital role of spiritual inheritance. So perhaps it's time we saw the elderly not as those who have passed their prime, but as those who have been primed by time and experience for their most important mission. Every wrinkle, every gray hair, every year lived becomes part of the wisdom toolkit God has assembled for guiding the next generation. In His divine economy, nothing is wasted. Not a single experience, not a single year, not a single gray hair. Because in the end, this isn't just about passing on information. It's about passing on transformation. It's about showing the next generation not just what to believe, but how to believe. Not just how to live, but how to live well. Not just how to grow old, but how to grow old gracefully in God's perfect plan. Weak in body, strong in spirit. Let's confront something that many of us fear about aging: the physical changes. Yes, our bodies slow down. Our joints might creak a bit more, our steps might not be as swift, and our strength might not be what it once was. But what if I told you that these very changes that society sees as weaknesses are actually doorways to experiencing God's strength in ways we never could in our youth? Consider the Apostle Paul's powerful revelation in 2 Corinthians 12:9-10. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. For when I am weak, then I am strong." Paul wasn't talking about temporary weakness. He was discovering a profound spiritual principle that many of us only fully grasp as we age. Our physical limitations can become gateways to supernatural strength. Think about a young tree versus an ancient oak. The young tree might be more flexible, but the old oak has learned to sink its roots deeper, drawing strength from places the young tree hasn't yet reached. This is exactly what happens spiritually as we age. While our physical strength may diminish, our spiritual roots grow deeper, accessing strength from the eternal rather than the temporal. But here's what makes this transformation so beautiful. As our dependence on physical strength decreases, our awareness of God's strength increases. It's like turning down the volume of one song to hear another, more beautiful melody playing underneath. The weakness we feel in our bodies actually tunes our spirits to rely more fully on God's power. Remember Jacob in the Bible? It wasn't until he wrestled with God and walked away with a limp that he truly became Israel, a prince with God. His physical weakness became the mark of his spiritual strength. How many of us fight against the limitations of aging, when perhaps these very limitations are God's way of teaching us to lean more fully on His strength? Think about it. When we were young, it was easy to rely on our own strength, our own abilities, our own resources. But as age brings physical limitations, we're invited into a deeper experience of God's power. Every ache becomes a reminder to pray, every limitation an opportunity to trust, every weakness a chance to experience His strength in new ways. This is why Paul could say with such conviction, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." He had discovered what many elderly saints know, that physical decline doesn't have to mean spiritual decline. In fact, it often leads to spiritual incline, as we learn to exchange our failing strength for His unfailing power. Consider how this plays out in daily life. Maybe you can't do everything you used to do physically, but this limitation often leads to a deeper prayer life. Perhaps you don't have the energy you once had, but this causes you to choose your activities more wisely, focusing on what truly matters. Your physical pace might slow down, but this often leads to a richer contemplative life, more time in God's presence, more awareness of His working in the small moments. This is the paradox of aging in God's kingdom. As our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. 2 Corinthians 4:16. Every physical limitation becomes an invitation to experience God's strength in a new way. Every weakness becomes a window through which His power can shine more clearly. Look at Moses. His physical strength may have diminished over his 120 years, but the Bible tells us his spiritual vision never dimmed. Or consider John on the island of Patmos, physically exiled and aged, yet spiritually more attuned than ever to receive the greatest revelation of Jesus Christ. This transformation isn't just about coping with aging, it's about discovering a whole new dimension of God's power. When we're young, we often experience God's strength as an addition to our own. But as we age, we experience His strength as a complete replacement for our weakness. And this is actually a more pure and powerful experience of His might. And here's something remarkable. This exchange of our weakness for His strength often makes elderly believers some of the most spiritually powerful people in any community. They might not run marathons anymore, but they can pray with a persistence and faith that moves mountains. They might not lift heavy weights, but they can carry others' burdens through intercession with remarkable endurance. So perhaps it's time we stopped seeing the physical limitations of aging as losses and started seeing them as invitations to experience God's strength in deeper ways, to rely on His power more fully, to trust His promises more completely. Because in God's economy, physical weakness isn't a barrier to spiritual strength. It's often the very doorway through which His power flows most freely. Remember, God's promise isn't that we'll never experience weakness. His promise is that His strength will be perfectly displayed in our weakness. And that's a promise that becomes more precious, more real, and more powerful with each passing year. Old age helps see the truth. There's a profound transformation that happens as we age, a shifting of perspective that brings everything into clearer focus. Like climbing a mountain, the higher we go in years, the more we can see what truly matters in life. Suddenly, the things that seemed so crucial in our youth, the pursuit of wealth, status, or fame, begin to fade in importance, while eternal values shine brighter than ever. The Apostle Paul captured this wisdom perfectly in Philippians 3:7-8, when he wrote, "But whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord." This wasn't just philosophical musing. It was the hard-earned wisdom of someone who had lived long enough to see through the world's illusions. Think about how many elderly people will tell you they wish they'd spent more time with family, invested more in relationships, or focused more on their spiritual life. They're not speaking from regret as much as from clarity, the kind of clarity that only comes with years of living. They've learned through experience what many of us struggle to understand in our youth, that the most valuable things in life aren't things at all. As we age, material possessions begin to lose their shine. The latest gadgets, the newest fashions, the biggest houses, they all start to feel less important compared to the warmth of family gatherings, the joy of genuine friendships, and the peace of knowing God. It's like watching a sunrise. As the true light grows stronger, the artificial lights that seemed so bright in the darkness naturally fade away. This is why elderly believers often have such a powerful testimony. They've lived long enough to test everything this world offers against the promises of God, and they've found that only God's promises hold true. They've discovered that while earthly treasures rust and fade, heavenly investments yield eternal returns. Their perspective isn't just shaped by what they've been taught, it's forged by what they've lived. In a world obsessed with temporary pleasures and instant gratification, the elderly stand as witnesses to a deeper truth, that life's greatest joys are found not in what we accumulate, but in what we give away. Not in how we preserve ourselves, but in how we pour ourselves out for others. Not in staying young forever, but in growing wise through the years. Perhaps this is why God allows our physical sight to dim with age, so our spiritual vision can grow sharper. As the distractions of this world fade, the realities of eternity come into clearer focus. Each passing year becomes another step in our journey from temporal thinking to eternal perspective, from earthly values to heavenly wisdom. So maybe getting older isn't about losing our grip on life, but rather about finally grasping what life is truly about. It's about seeing through the fog of worldly priorities to recognize what really matters in light of eternity. And isn't that one of God's greatest blessings, the gift of true perspective, the ability to see life not just as it appears, but as it truly is in His eternal plan? As we come to the end of our journey today, let's embrace this transformative truth. Aging isn't a burden to bear, but a blessing to celebrate. Every gray hair, every wrinkle, every passing year is a testament to God's faithful hand in your life, writing a story more beautiful than anything we could craft on our own. Remember Psalm 71:18, where David prays, "Even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation." This wasn't a prayer of desperation, but a declaration of purpose. Each year added to your life isn't just marking time. It's marking opportunities to witness God's faithfulness, to share His wisdom, and to leave footprints for others to follow. So today, I want to leave you with this question. Will you choose to see aging through society's fearful lens, or through God's eyes of purpose and promise? Will you count the years as losses, or will you count them as testimony of God's endless grace in your life? Your story isn't winding down. It's building up to something beautiful. These coming years could be the most meaningful, most impactful years of your life. Because in God's kingdom, we don't retire from purpose, we refine it. We don't lose value, we gain wisdom. We don't become less, we become more. Remember, every morning you wake up to find another gray hair or notice another wrinkle. You're not seeing signs of decay. You're seeing signatures of God's faithfulness. So hold your head high, wear your age with dignity, and celebrate each year as another chapter in God's amazing story of grace in your life.